Do you experience cramps in your thighs, or can't stretch your legs fully, or you are more in a C shape rather than an L shape, or even worse, looking like a fish getting out of water? Hi, my name is Benji, and welcome to LSIT 101. This time around, we got a lot more tips for absolute beginners because learning the LSIT is really one of the best exercises to kick things off with when just starting calisthenics. So what's the deal with LSIT? Why even bother holding yourself up in this position? Well, because it is one of the best ways in calisthenics to build your core strength that will also translate over to plenty of other exercises in the future. And it also just looks really cool. Just look at gymnasts, for example, very smooth and controlled movements, thanks in a large part to their core. So that is exactly what we're gonna try and build. If you're just looking to skip around or you're looking for something specific, we have the timestamps in the description. If you want all the information, stick around. Now, before we do anything, warming up is always a good idea, but especially so for an exercise like the LSIT, which is not only about core strength, but your hip flexors and your hamstrings also need a good range of motion, and here's why that's important. Now, as most of you probably know, your hamstring is the muscle that connects your lower leg to your pelvis. And what happens when it's too tight is that it can pull your pelvis backwards when trying to straighten your legs, which makes it very hard to maintain an upright posture during an LSIT. This often results in a rounded or crooked back, which makes the LSIT much harder to hold and also puts unnecessary strain on your back as well. Now, the hip flexors is another major player here because it allows you to lift your leg and hold it at that specific position. So if they're too tight, that will be a lot harder to do. So some key stretches that we can do for the hamstrings and the hip flexors are, well, first for the hamstrings, the seated forward fold. So you sit on the floor with your legs straight out in front of you. You keep your spine long and try to hinge from your hips as you reach forward to your toes. Even if you can't reach very far, just holding this position will still help you lengthen the hamstring. And remember that you're trying to bring your upper body forward instead of downwards. And for a more dynamic stretch, you can try the standing forward fold, where you add in a couple of pumps and you try and go deeper and deeper with every single pump. Second one is a lying stretch with a band or towel. Lie on your back and use a strap or towel around the arch of one foot. Keep the other leg flat on the ground as you lift the strapped leg towards the ceiling, gently pulling it closer with the strap. And then the third is the kneeling hip flexor stretch. With this one, you want to start in a half kneeling position with one knee on the ground and the other foot in front. Now gently push your hips forward while keeping your back straight. And you can also deepen the stretch by squeezing your ass cheeks together. And then last but not least, don't forget your wrists, as you will be supporting your entire body weight on them, so it's important that they are nice and loose as well. Just start out on your hands and knees and kind of move in all directions. Just hold each position for like 20 seconds or so. And if you still feel discomfort in your wrists during LSIT training, what you can also do is maybe try and rotate your hands a bit, or using other equipment like Parallettes to train them on, but more on that later. Before getting into the exercises, let's go over the key details of a perfect LSIT. Start by placing your hands flat on the ground at hip level or slightly forward, shoulder width apart. Actively press down into the floor, engaging your shoulders and upper back, helping you lift your hips higher. Simultaneously, engage your core like you're bracing for a punch. Your arms should remain straight throughout the movement. Bent elbows will make it less stable and more challenging to hold. It's the same principle as with a push-up, for example. Holding the position like this feels a lot nicer than holding it like this. Lean back slightly, just enough to counterbalance the weight of your legs, like a scale balancing evenly. Pointing your toes is a small adjustment, but it makes a very big difference. It helps you engage the muscles in your legs, making them more rigid, which actually makes it easier to hold as well. Your gaze should be directed forward or slightly down. This helps keep your head in a neutral position, which is crucial for maintaining a straight back. So just try and avoid looking downwards, as it causes your shoulders to round forward. All right, let's get down to business. You don't need a ton of exercises to master the LSIT, you just need the right ones. So here are the key muscle groups that are involved, what their specific role is, and the exercises to train them effectively, so you can hold that LSIT with confidence. The first muscle group are the core muscles, specifically the abs and the obliques. You can think of them as the captain of the ship. Without them, you're going down. And specifically for the LSIT, there's really only 3 exercises that you need. First up, the hollow body hold. For an LSIT, you really need your body to be tight and stable. There is no wobbling allowed. It doesn't just work the front of your abs, it engages the deeper core muscles that wrap around your entire midsection. You can start with an easier version by tucking your legs in slightly, or you can make it harder by rocking back and forth, trying to maintain that same position. It's an effective core exercise because it prepares you to engage everything simultaneously, and it builds endurance, which are 2 crucial things for an LSIT. The second exercise are leg raises. Keeping your legs lifted, straight, and parallel from the ground require a lot of strength from your hip flexors and your lower abs. And leg raises are the perfect exercise to target those lower abs, which are usually very hard to reach with other exercises like crunches, for example. You learn to control your legs through every angle, up, down, and everything in between, which is exactly the kind of control that you also need to hold that L-sit position. Progressions are pretty simple. The more you bend your knees, the easier it gets. Just make sure that your back stays flat. And to increase the difficulty, add a pause at the top before lowering back down. Plus they work the hip flexors, which is kind of like a 2-in-1 benefit, I guess. So there are two versions of leg raises that you can do. The one on the dip bars and the one where you are hanging. Each have their own benefits. Starting with hanging leg raises. This is a killer core workout, because your core doesn't need to just lift your legs, it also needs to stabilize your entire body so you avoid swinging around like a goddamn pendulum. What this also means is that you have to control the down part just as much as that you control the lifting part. And then the second version is leg raises on dip bars. With your hands supporting you from below, you're basically already halfway there. The transition to an actual L-sit will feel a lot smoother and more natural because your body already knows what to do. So my advice is to incorporate both of them into your workouts to get the best of both worlds. Then of course, a third awesome exercise is the L-sit itself, but with some variations according to your fitness level. This can mean tucked, less tucked, one leg L-sit kicks, and so forth. Now, besides your core, your hip flexors play an important role too, as without them, no matter how strong your core is, you just would not be able to lift your leg up. Hip flexor strength can also help avoid those annoying cramps that you might get during L-sit training. I'm pretty sure you know what I'm talking about. If your hip flexors aren't strong enough, your quads will have to work overtime, keeping them straight, but also helping to keep them lifted, which might lead into those painful cramps. It's often a very overlooked muscle, but super important for this, so here are some great exercises for it. First exercise is seated leg lifts. Sit on the floor with your legs straight in front of you and your hands placed beside your hips. Lift one leg a few inches off the ground, keeping it straight, and then lower it slowly. And the further you place your hands, the harder it gets. Once you're comfortable, try lifting both legs together. Make sure to keep the rocking back and forth to a minimal. And trust me, you will feel them burn pretty quickly if you do it correctly. To make it more challenging, you can lift your butt from the floor by placing your hands on an elevated surface so that your legs have to travel a longer distance. And as you gain strength in your hip flexors, those quad cramps will become a lot less frequent because you will rely a lot less on your quads as well. But they can still happen sometimes. And then the second exercise is the standing hip flexor raises with a resistance band. So for this one, you want to secure a resistance band to a low anchor point and loop the other end around your foot. Stand facing away from the anchor and lift your knee up against the resistance of the band and then lower it slowly, and repeat that on each side. The resistance bands help you strengthen the muscles through their full range of motion with the most resistance at the top, which is exactly what you need to hold an L-sit as well. For an added challenge, you can hold the top position for a few seconds before coming back down. And then lastly, a problem for some, but not all, is having too short arms to do an L-sit. I'll tell you that for 90% of you guys that say this, it's not the case. Here's how you can test it. Sit on a chair and place your hands beside you. If you can reach the chair, well, then your arms are long enough. The only difference right now is that you are depressing your shoulders. Now this is easy because your arms are currently bent, but if you try to straighten them, this already becomes a lot harder to depress. Now imagine you also have to lift yourself off of the ground whilst doing this. So if you struggle with that shoulder depression strength, here are some exercises for that. First up, sit on the floor with your legs straight in front of you and your hands beside your hips, pressing your palms into the ground. Focus on pushing your shoulders down and away from your ears as you try to lift your hips slightly off the ground. An easier variation on this are scapular push-ups. Without bending your elbows, squeeze your shoulder blades together and then press them apart by pushing the floor away, moving your chest slightly up and down. And for the people that want to make it harder, you can do shoulder depression on dip bars. This involves lifting your entire body weight, making it a more challenging way to build that shoulder depression strength. Now, those are all the exercises that you basically need to learn an L-sit, but there are just a couple of last notes that I want to give you guys. First up, placing your hands on an elevated surface like blocks or parallettes makes learning the L-sit a lot easier. When your hands are elevated, you have more space between the ground and your legs. This means that you don't need as much hip flexor strength or flexibility to keep your legs off of the ground. Elevating your hands can also make it more easy on your shoulders as they are in a more natural position, which means that your arms might not be too short. Besides quad cramps, another common issue is this uncontrollable shaking that happens when you're performing an L-sit, even when your muscles don't feel fatigued yet. This is usually due to the high coordination demand from your nervous system to engage your core, your hip flexors, and leg muscles simultaneously. So when you're not used to that movement, your nervous system kind of struggles with that coordination, which makes you kind of shake. Kind of think of it as learning how to drive a manual car. At first, you know, your gear shifts are very rocking. You rock back and forth all the time. And after a while, as you get better, those gear shifts become smoother, unless you're just a really bad driver. But anyways, the same with the L-sit. The more you practice it, the better and more efficient you will become, so that shaking will eventually stop. And the second thing I want to talk about is when you finally achieve that L-sit, how do you increase that hold time? Here are 2 ways to do it. First up, progressive overload with time. Start by holding the L-sit for as long as you can with good form, even if it's just for a few seconds, and then gradually increase the time you hold by a second or 2 each week. This progressive overloads helps your muscles adapt to the increased demand, building endurance over time. And then once you hit the 15-second mark, you can think of adding on weights, like for example ankle weights, or even your shoes if you were training on socks, which I highly recommend, by the way. And trust me when I say that adding these little weights will already make a world of a difference. A second good way to do it is to incorporate rest, pause, holds. If you can't hold it for a long time yet, try doing shorter holds with brief rest periods in between. This method allows you to accumulate a lot of time under tension, which will help your muscles to sustain the hold for longer periods. So for the people still watching, I want to thank you guys. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you have any questions or any concerns, you know, you can comment down below or send me a DM on Instagram, and then I will see you guys the next time. Goodbye. Ugh.